The day the HOA Karen lost her mind over my water well. You won't believe what happened when an HOA Karen lost her mind watching me collect water from my own well. There she was, storming onto my farm in her business suit, pointing and screaming that my perfectly legal water well was unauthorized. She demanded I shut it down immediately or face thousands in fines. But what happened next taught her a lesson she'll never forget. Trust me, if you're a homeowner, you need to see how I stood my ground. This story might just save your property rights one day. The backstory: 5 years ago, I bought this little piece of paradise with dreams of making it completely self-sufficient. After working 60-hour weeks in tech for over a decade, I wanted to build something sustainable for my family. But then, a devastating drought hit our region. 3 years with barely any rainfall left my neighbors struggling. Water bills doubled, then tripled. Mrs. Johnson, my retired neighbor, had to choose between her medication and keeping her garden alive. Young families on our street were cutting back on essentials to pay their utility bills. That's when I started researching. Turns out, my grandfather knew something special when he bought this land. We're sitting right on top of a pristine natural aquifer, and his original water rights were never revoked. I invested $7,500 from my family's emergency fund into a professional well installation. I did everything by the book: county permits, environmental impact assessments, proper depth certification, and even had the water quality tested for my kids' safety. The day that crystal clear water first flowed from my well was one of the proudest moments of my life. Little did I know, the nightmare was about to begin: the HOA's unwelcome interest. It started with unfamiliar cars driving slowly past my property. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe just people admiring the improvements I'd made. Then Bob from down the street stopped by. "Watch yourself," he warned. "The HOA has been conducting special inspections lately. Seems they're targeting anyone making improvements without their blessing." The next morning, I found an anonymous letter in my mailbox. No signature, just HOA letterhead. All water collection systems require pre-approval. Funny thing is, a well isn't a collection system. It's accessing groundwater rights that predate the HOA by decades. That evening, my security cameras caught someone photographing my well from the road. They didn't set foot on my property, just documented everything from a distance. Something felt off. A week later, everyone received an emergency HOA meeting notice. The main agenda item: water usage regulations and enforcement. The timing couldn't be coincidental. I spent that night organizing every permit, water rights document, and county approval letter. My gut told me I'd need them soon. The confrontation. The confrontation came sooner than expected. At 7 a.m. the next morning, my doorbell rang. There she stood, clipboard in hand, face already twisted with disapproval. Little did I know, this woman was about to become my worst nightmare. "Mr. Johnson, I'm here about multiple violations on your property," she declared. No introduction, no HOA identification badge, just immediate hostility. I tried being civil. "Good morning. Mind identify yourself first?" She huffed. "I'm with the Homeowners Association. That's all you need to know." When I asked which specific HOA position she held, she completely ignored the question and marched right past me toward my backyard. That's when she fixated on my well. "This unauthorized structure needs to be removed immediately," she declared, already scribbling on her clipboard. "Ma'am, this is a properly permitted well. I have all the documentation." "Groundwater is community property," she interrupted. "The HOA bylaws clearly state all water usage must be approved and metered." I calmly retrieved my permit folder. Actually, my property has grandfathered water rights from 1958. The county has fully approved this installation. Her face flushed red. "Those rights were surrendered when you joined the HOA." "That's incorrect," I replied. "Water rights run with the land, not the homeowner. They can't be surrendered without explicit documentation, which doesn't exist." That's when she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling for backup. This situation requires immediate intervention." While she was on the phone, I heard her say, "He's being completely uncooperative. Yes, we may need to place a lien." "No, don't worry about the documentation yet. That was the moment I decided to start recording. I pulled out my phone and announced, "For everyone's protection, I'm documenting this interaction." The look on her face when she saw my phone? Pure rage mixed with something else, fear. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a well. Something much bigger was happening. "Turn that off immediately," she demanded, trying to block my camera. "Recording HOA business is prohibited." "Actually, we're on my private property and I have every right to record," I said firmly. She stepped closer, pointing her finger just inches from my face. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I can make your life absolutely miserable." I stood my ground. "I'm dealing with someone who hasn't properly identified herself, who entered my property without permission and who's now threatening me. Please step back." That's when I noticed her designer watch and a luxury car parked out front. This wasn't your typical HOA volunteer. Something wasn't adding up. The truth unravels. "Your well is reducing property values in this community," she claimed, changing tactics. "The aesthetic damage alone violates at least 3 bylaws." I gestured to my well, which I carefully landscaped to blend with the garden. "Ma'am, this well is more attractive than most approved lawn ornaments in the neighborhood. The real issue seems to be the water itself, not how it looks." Her eyes narrowed. "The HOA has contracts with approved water suppliers. Your independent source undermines those relationships." Now, things were starting to make sense. I decided to press further. "Which supplier specifically? And what's your relationship with them?" She recoiled like I'd slapped her. "That's completely irrelevant. The violation stands." She thrust a violation notice toward me. $10,000 fine, payable within 30 days, and immediate cessation of all unauthorized water collection. I refuse to take the paper. "I'll need to see your HOA credentials first and confirmation this action was approved by the board." When I mentioned the board, something flickered across her face. Uncertainty. "The board has fully empowered me to enforce water regulations," she said, less confidently. "Then you won't mind if I call the HOA president right now to confirm," I said, pulling out my phone again. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed, glancing nervously at her watch. "I'm placing your property on immediate non-compliance status. The sheriff will be contacted." I smiled calmly. "Perfect. Let's get law enforcement involved. I'm sure they'll be very interested in these threats and your refusal to identify yourself properly." The sheriff arrives. 20 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up. 2 men in business casual attire approached, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "This is Mr. Peterson and Mr. Walsh from the HOA board," she announced triumphantly. I nodded politely. "Gentlemen, was there an official board meeting authorizing today's inspection?" They exchanged nervous glances. The taller one spoke first. "Well, not exactly. Karen called us directly about an urgent compliance issue." "Karen," I said, finally putting a name to the face. "And you are officially on the HOA board?" I pressed. "I'm the treasurer," the shorter man confirmed. "Doug's the maintenance committee chair." I turned to Karen. "And your official HOA position is?" She cleared her throat. "I'm a special consultant on water management." "Interesting," I said. "Despite my busy work schedule, I've attended every HOA meeting for the past year. I don't recall any vote to hire a consultant." Karen quickly flipped through her clipboard papers. Section 17, subsection C clearly prohibits water collection systems visible from common areas. I smiled. My well isn't visible from any common area. And Section 17 refers to rainwater collection, not groundwater access. The board members looked surprised. Karen stammered, "The aesthetic impact still violates community standards." Just then, my neighbor Jim appeared at the edge of my property. As a retired attorney, he had perfect timing. "Everything all right here, Tom?" he called out. Noticed quite the gathering. "These folks from the HOA have concerns about my well," I explained, though I'm still waiting to understand the specific violations. Jim strolled over. "Fascinating. I've been reviewing HOA bylaws recently. Don't recall anything prohibiting properly permitted wells." Karen suddenly headed toward my well house. "I need to inspect the pumping equipment." "Ma'am, that's private property." I stated firmly. You can't enter without permission, which I'm not granting. She reached for the door handle anyway. HOA representatives have inspection rights for all exterior structures. Not without 48 hours written notice. Jim interjected. Article 8, Section 3. I pulled out my phone again. I'm calling the County Water Authority to verify my permits and rights. Feel free to stay while we get official clarification. As I dialed, I noticed other neighbors gathering at the edge of my property. Mrs. Rodriguez with her walking cane, the Thompsons from across the street. Even reclusive Mr. Avery stood watching from his driveway. Karen noticed him too, her composure visibly cracked as she realized this confrontation now had an audience. The county steps in. The Water Authority confirmed they'd send someone immediately. Karen's face fell as she realized her bluff was about to be called. With neighbors gathering and county officials on their way, Karen switched to pure desperation mode. The HOA has final authority over all property modifications, she declared loudly, more for the growing audience than for me. This well undermines our community water conservation efforts. Jim, my attorney neighbor, calmly responded. Conservation typically encourages reducing water usage from municipal sources. A private well with historical rights actually supports conservation goals. The crowd murmured in agreement. More neighbors had arrived, drawn by the commotion. 30 minutes later, a county water resources truck pulled up. A middle-aged woman in a county uniform approached with a clipboard in hand. I'm Susan Martinez, County Water Authority. I understand there's a dispute about water rights. Karen rushed forward. This property owner has installed an unauthorized water extraction system that violates HOA regulations. Ms. Martinez reviewed my permits methodically. Everything appears in order. These water rights predate your HOA by several decades. The installation meets all county requirements. Karen's face contorted with frustration. But our community water plan specifically prohibits. But what about the rate increases? She blurted out, immediately realizing her mistake. Rate increases? Ms. Martinez asked. What do community water rates have to do with a private well? That's when Melissa, my neighbor's college-age daughter, gasped. Wait, I recognize you. You were on that news segment about private water corporations. Karen went pale. Multiple neighbors pulled out phones, searching online. Here she is, shouted Mr. Peterson from 2 doors down. Karen Westfield, Regional Acquisition Director for Private Water Corporation. There's an article about their community water system takeovers. Panic flashed across Karen's face. She lunged toward Mr. Peterson. Let me see that. You can't just... Are you trying to grab my phone? Mr. Peterson backed away, holding his phone above his head. Everyone saw that, right? The 2 uncomfortable HOA board members looked thoroughly confused. You work for private water? The treasurer asked Karen. You told us you were an independent consultant. Karen was unraveling before our eyes. This is ridiculous. I'm calling the sheriff to clear this illegal gathering. Actually, I said calmly, pulling out my phone, I already did. They should be here any minute. On cue, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up our street, lights flashing. Perfect timing, I said, unable to suppress a smile. Now we can get this all sorted out officially. The color drained completely from Karen's face as she realized her intimidation tactics had spectacularly backfired. The aftermath: the sheriff, a no-nonsense woman with 20 years of experience written on her face, assessed the situation quickly. So, who exactly called about a disturbance? She asked. I stepped forward. I did, officer. This woman entered my property claiming HOA authority, but has refused to properly identify herself. The county water official interjected. I can confirm all his well permits are valid, Sheriff. And you are? The sheriff asked Karen directly. Karen straightened her jacket, attempting to regain composure. Karen Westfield, representing the Homeowners Association on a compliance matter. The county official checked her tablet. Wait, we have no record of a Karen Westfield as an authorized HOA representative in our system. My neighbor Melissa, who had been frantically searching on her phone, found her LinkedIn profile. Everyone, Executive Vice President of Community Acquisition at Private Water Corporation, with a specialization in transitioning community water systems to private management. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, are you employed by this private water company?" "My employment is irrelevant to these HOA violations," Karen stammered. Mr. Abernathy, our neighborhood historian who rarely spoke, suddenly stepped forward. "She tried to buy your property last year." I turned, shocked. "What?" "Remember that corporate offer you rejected? The holding company was a private water subsidiary. I recognize the tax ID number from my days in corporate law." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. My property had the oldest water rights in the community, rights that could potentially block a complete corporate takeover of our water system. The ripple effects. The sheriff returned to address the crowd. "I've spoken with Ms. Westfield. Here's where we stand. The homeowner can press criminal trespassing charges, and the HOA can pursue civil action for misrepresentation." I looked at my neighbors' faces. Seniors worried about water bills, young families just getting by, retirees who'd worked their whole lives to these homes. Karen's scheme would have devastated this community. "I'll press charges." I decided, not for revenge, but to create an official record of what happened here. Karen was escorted to the sheriff's cruiser. As she passed me, she hissed, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually," I replied calmly, "I think everyone here knows exactly who we're dealing with now." A community transformed. The neighbors spontaneously gathered on my lawn, the impromptu meeting growing larger as word spread through the community. 3 other homeowners came forward, describing similar intimidation attempts regarding their rain barrels and garden irrigation systems. Dave, our HOA president, addressed everyone. "I propose an emergency HOA meeting tonight. We need to formally document this attempted corporate infiltration and protect our community's water rights." The vote was unanimous. As Karen watched from the cruiser window, our community transformed before her eyes. From scattered homeowners to a unified front against corporate water exploitation. The legacy. That evening, our community center was packed beyond capacity. The emergency HOA meeting had drawn the largest attendance in our neighborhood's history. Dave called the meeting to order, recounting the day's events for those who hadn't witnessed them firsthand. Gasps filled the room as he detailed Karen's deception and private water's planned rate increases. The first order of business, a bylaw amendment explicitly protecting private water rights within our community. The vote was unanimous, a sea of raised hands without a single dissent. Dave continued, "I propose we establish a homeowner oversight committee for all utility negotiations. No more backroom deals without community.